It was a bright and sunny afternoon, the kind of day that makes anyone want to be out on the water. The main character had just finished a busy week and decided to spend some time on the boat, enjoying the calm waves and gentle breeze. The marina was alive with activity, families walking along the docks, children laughing as they played near the water, and boats of all sizes moving slowly in and out of their slips. It was the perfect escape from the usual grind of life. The protagonist had always loved boating. It was not just a hobby, but a way to clear the mind, to feel free and connected to nature. Every detail on the boat was arranged carefully, from the neat deck to the sparkling polished rails. Even small things mattered. The ropes coiled neatly, the cushions fluffed, and the small flag fluttering proudly at the back. Today, everything seemed perfect. The sun shone down warmly, the sky was clear, and the water mirrored the blue above. As the protagonist maneuvered the boat toward an empty slip, a voice called out sharply. It was a woman who had been observing from the dock. Her expression was stern, and she seemed annoyed before even saying a word. She was someone the protagonist had seen at the marina before, known for being strict and quick to complain about the smallest things. People in the marina often whispered about her. Some called her Karen, a nickname she had earned for being very particular about rules and behavior around the docks. The woman stepped closer, her hands on her hips. "Hey, you can't park your boat there," she said. There was no real reason for her anger. The slip was empty, and the protagonist had every right to dock there. But her tone was sharp, almost accusing. The protagonist smiled politely and explained, "I just want to dock for a few minutes. There's no one here, and I'll be careful." But the woman didn't seem interested in listening. She shook her head and without warning pulled out her phone. Before the protagonist could respond, she started speaking loudly into the phone. It became clear she was calling the police. She gestured dramatically, pointing at the boat as if it were doing something illegal. Other people in the marina turned to look, some curious, some amused, and a few shaking their heads at the unnecessary drama. The protagonist stayed calm. Years of experience in business and life had taught one thing. Staying calm in moments of chaos often brought better results than reacting with anger. Instead of raising the voice or arguing, the protagonist kept a friendly smile and explained politely to the bystanders, "There's no problem here, just docking for a few minutes. Everything is fine." Yet the woman continued, speaking firmly into the phone, clearly trying to make the situation seem urgent. Minutes felt longer than they actually were. The protagonist watched the small crowd gathering, listening to snippets of the conversation from others. Everyone seemed to understand that there was no real issue, but the drama had a way of pulling attention. Boats rocked gently in their slips, seagulls flew overhead, and the water shimmered in the sunlight, making the scene feel almost surreal. Here was a beautiful afternoon on the water, interrupted by an unnecessary confrontation. Finally, the protagonist decided to take a small step back. Instead of letting the tension grow, the boat was shifted slightly, leaving extra space between it and the docks. The woman, however, didn't notice this gesture, or perhaps it didn't matter to her. She continued describing the situation in sharp tones to the police. Her face showed satisfaction, as if she were performing an important duty. She was sure she had caused a problem, and she wanted recognition for it. Other boaters whispered among themselves. Some approached to offer support or advice. "Don't worry, she does this all the time," one said quietly. Another added, "Just stay calm. You're fine. No one can stop you from docking there." The protagonist nodded politely, grateful for the small gestures of support. It was a reminder that even when a person seemed determined to cause trouble, there were always those who understood reality. While waiting for any possible arrival of authorities, the protagonist observed the woman carefully. She moved with purpose, scanning the marina as if looking for others who might agree with her. Her phone remained glued to her ear, voice still high-pitched and sharp. It was clear that she thrived on control and attention. The protagonist thought briefly about past encounters at this marina, remembering small conflicts that had always ended without real consequences, but never this public and dramatic. Instead of feeling anger, a sense of curiosity began to grow. Why did she react this way? Was it just about control, or was there something deeper? It was easy to let irritation take over, but the protagonist knew that understanding the situation fully would be more powerful. Perhaps there was a lesson hidden in this confrontation. a way to turn an annoying moment into something meaningful. The calmness of the water and the clear blue sky reminded that patience often revealed opportunities that quick reactions could not. 10 minutes passed. The protagonist continued to smile and nod to the few onlookers who offered friendly words. The woman, still on the phone, didn't seem to notice the passage of time. Boats continued to move in the marina, people walked along the docks, and life carried on as usual. It was almost funny. The contrast between the calm, beautiful day and the unnecessary storm she was trying to create. The protagonist almost laughed quietly to oneself, realizing the absurdity of the situation. Eventually, the woman's voice grew a little more frustrated, though it was hard to tell if it was directed at the police or at the protagonist. She gestured angrily, pointing at the boat and then at herself, clearly trying to assert dominance. But the protagonist remained composed, understanding that anger and frustration were never the best tools in life. Instead, there was an opportunity to observe, to reflect, and to think strategically. The rest of the marina slowly returned to its normal rhythm. People went back to their routines, some shaking their heads at the unnecessary drama, others laughing quietly at the situation. The protagonist continued adjusting the boat slightly, making sure everything was secure, taking in the fresh air and the soft sounds of water lapping against the hull. The moment had shifted from confrontation to observation, and in that calm, a small sense of clarity began to form. By the time the police call ended, whether or not the authorities would arrive was irrelevant. The protagonist had learned something valuable. Even in situations that seemed irritating or unfair, there was a way to remain calm, to observe, and to think ahead. It was not about winning an argument or proving someone wrong in the moment, but about seeing the bigger picture and waiting for the right moment to act. As the sun moved slowly toward the horizon, the protagonist sat quietly on the boat, reflecting on the events. It was a perfect day despite the interruption. The drama caused by one person's need for attention and control seemed insignificant in the larger context. The experience, though small, sparked an idea, a quiet sense that sometimes conflict could lead to unexpected opportunities if handled with patience and insight. By the end of this part of the day, the protagonist knew that this encounter was just a small chapter in a larger story. It was a story that would unfold in ways that were still unknown. But one thing was clear. The calm, patient approach had kept the day peaceful, and the absurdity of the confrontation had left room for thought, reflection, and perhaps even future action. The protagonist stayed on the boat a little longer, enjoying the last moments of the afternoon, smiling quietly at the irony of it all, and feeling a sense of readiness for whatever would come next. After the tension on the dock, the protagonist slowly left the marina, gliding smoothly across the water. The sun was still warm, and the gentle breeze made everything feel peaceful again. The earlier incident with the woman who called the police replayed in the mind like a strange, small movie. At first it felt irritating and unfair, but as the protagonist looked out at the open water, the frustration began to fade. There was something about being on the water that made the problems of the world seem smaller, like they could be handled with patience and thought. As the boat moved through the calm waves, the protagonist thought about what had just happened. The absurdity of the confrontation began to take on a different meaning. It was clear that some people thrived on drama, enjoying the idea of controlling situations even when it made no sense. But this didn't have to ruin the day or the mood. Instead, the protagonist felt a spark of curiosity. What would happen if this small conflict could be turned into something meaningful, or even beneficial? It seemed unlikely, but sometimes opportunities appeared where least expected. Pulling out a small notebook from the cabin, the protagonist began jotting down thoughts and ideas. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet reflection on the incident. One thing became clear: reacting with anger or frustration would achieve nothing. Remaining calm, observing carefully, and thinking ahead could be far more effective. The notes included simple points. Observe carefully, understand the situation fully, think strategically, and look for potential opportunities. Even small conflicts could teach valuable lessons if approached the right way. As the minutes passed, the protagonist remembered other experiences in life and business, where patience had proven essential. Often it was the quick reactions that led to mistakes, while calm observation allowed for smart decisions. This situation, on the dock though minor, reminded that the same principles applied to all aspects of life. One could see things from a larger perspective and sometimes turn a frustrating moment into an unexpected advantage. The protagonist allowed the mind to wander further. Perhaps there was more to the Marina than just this small dispute. The woman, who had called the police though overbearing, clearly had some influence in the area. Maybe this influence could be understood, perhaps even used in a strategic way. There was no malice in the thought, just curiosity and careful consideration. Opportunities often hid inside challenges, and this was one of those times where careful thinking might reveal something valuable. As the boat drifted gently, the protagonist also reflected on personal emotions. There was no need to carry anger or resentment from this small incident. Letting go of unnecessary negativity made the experience easier to learn from. Instead of focusing on irritation, the protagonist focused on observation and insight, the way the woman acted, the way she sought control, and the way others reacted. All of these details offered valuable lessons about human behavior. People often acted in predictable ways when driven by ego, and understanding these patterns could be powerful. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden light across the water. The calm and beauty of the surroundings offered clarity. The protagonist began thinking about the marina itself, imagining it from a broader perspective. Perhaps the marina could be more than just a place to dock boats. It could be a welcoming, thriving space for people who genuinely love the water, a place that encouraged community rather than conflict. These thoughts sparked a subtle excitement, an idea that had not existed before the incident. The protagonist's mind went further. What if, instead of just reacting to the woman's actions, the situation could be transformed entirely? It was an unusual thought, almost humorous in how it contrasted with the tension earlier. But sometimes the best ideas came from unexpected moments. This was one of those rare times where irritation could be turned into insight, where frustration could spark creativity. The boat continued to move across the water, and the protagonist's thoughts moved as smoothly as the waves. As evening approached, the protagonist docked the boat at a quiet spot away from the earlier scene. The day had been long, filled with sun and gentle waves. Yet the incident with the woman lingered in the mind as a point of reflection. It was no longer a source of anger, but a puzzle to consider. What could be learned? What opportunities might exist? The protagonist decided to spend some time thinking calmly, letting the ideas settle and form a plan for action. Calmness often revealed things that impatience or anger would obscure. Sitting on the deck, the protagonist observed other boats gently rocking in their slips, families leaving for the day, and the soft shimmer of sunlight reflecting on the water. Each movement, each sound felt like part of a larger rhythm. The woman's sharp voice and hasty actions seemed smaller now, almost comical in their intensity. Life continued smoothly around her, unaffected by the brief drama she had caused. The protagonist realized that perspective was powerful. The world rarely stopped for small conflicts, and letting them dominate one's thoughts was unnecessary. A notebook lay open beside the protagonist, filled with notes and observations. Some of them were about human behavior, others about the marina and potential ways to improve or expand opportunities. There was no rush, just careful reflection and a sense of purpose forming gradually. Every note, every thought, felt like a step toward a future plan. The earlier irritation had transformed into quiet determination. The protagonist was not reacting out of anger, but thinking strategically, understanding that patience often led to better results. As darkness slowly settled over the water, the protagonist remained seated, appreciating the quiet and calm. The small conflict with the woman had started as a frustrating moment, but had become a catalyst for insight. It was clear that with careful thought and strategic action, the situation could lead to something unexpected and positive. The protagonist felt a sense of readiness, knowing that the right time and approach could turn even minor challenges into opportunities. The evening air was cool and fresh, and the stars began to appear one by one in the sky. The water reflected the fading light, creating a peaceful, reflective scene. The protagonist made a mental note to return to the marina, not with anger or confrontation, but with clarity and purpose, understanding the situation fully, observing carefully and thinking strategically would guide the next steps. This was not just about one minor conflict, but about seeing the bigger picture and acting wisely when the moment was right. Finally, the protagonist stood and stretched, feeling a calm sense of determination. The day had offered a small challenge, a brief irritation, and a moment of insight. As the boat rested in the quiet slip, the protagonist smiled softly, realizing that sometimes life presented lessons in unusual ways. The key was patience, observation, and careful thought. Tomorrow might bring new opportunities, and the protagonist felt ready, calm, and focused on what could be achieved. With the stars above and the water gently lapping against the boat, the protagonist closed the notebook, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The day had been unusual yet productive in its own way. The incident with the woman who had called the police was no longer a source of frustration, but a spark of curiosity and strategic thinking. It was a reminder that even small conflicts could lead to valuable insights when approached with patience, calm, and an open mind. The protagonist stayed on the boat a little longer, enjoying the peaceful night, feeling ready for whatever came next, and quietly planning for the future that was beginning to take shape from the small chaos of the day. The next morning, the protagonist woke up with a clear sense of purpose. The events of the previous day had left a small spark of curiosity and strategy, and now it was time to explore it further. Over coffee, the protagonist began researching the marina, thinking carefully about its ownership and how it was managed. Public records, online reviews, and casual conversations with other boaters provided small but important details. It became clear that the woman who had called the police, known for her controlling behavior, was also the owner of the property. Her management style seemed strict and outdated, which often frustrated those who frequented the marina. The protagonist sat quietly, thinking through the possibilities. Owning a marina was not a casual business. It required organization, patience, and a good sense of customer service. Observing her past actions, it was easy to see that she often prioritized control over genuine improvement, creating a tension-filled environment. This insight sparked an idea. What if this property could be acquired and improved? Not as an act of revenge, but as a smart business opportunity. The marina had potential that she had not realized or cared to develop. Research continued throughout the morning. The protagonist made notes on potential improvements, costs, and how to manage the space in a way that encouraged community and enjoyment rather than conflict. There was an unmistakable excitement in the realization that the problem yesterday could be turned into a unique opportunity. Every small detail mattered. The layout of the docks, the parking spaces, the slip rentals, and even the atmosphere she had unintentionally created through her strict control. All of these could be turned into positive changes. Later, the protagonist decided to visit the marina in person, observing everything quietly and taking notes. The docks were busy with regular visitors, some chatting happily, others subtly complaining about strict rules. It was clear that while the woman managed the property, there were limits to her ability to make the space enjoyable for all. Watching from a distance, the protagonist noticed small things, how the boats were lined up, how people interacted, and how the staff responded to instructions. Each detail added clarity to the picture, forming a strategy for how the marina could be improved and made profitable. While walking along the docks, the protagonist also observed the woman herself. She was busy giving directions, speaking firmly to staff, and occasionally scolding boat owners. She seemed determined to control every aspect, yet the effectiveness was questionable. People complied out of fear rather than enthusiasm. This only reinforced the idea that with thoughtful management, the marina could be transformed into a place that attracted visitors naturally, without intimidation. The thought was exciting, turning an environment that frustrated people into one they genuinely enjoyed. By afternoon, the protagonist returned home and began drafting a preliminary plan. It was a mix of strategy and practical steps. Evaluate the market value, assess financial feasibility, and determine the best way to approach the current owner. There was no rush. The approach had to be calm, professional, and thoughtful, Acting impulsively would likely backfire, but careful planning could make the difference between failure and success. Notes included potential upgrades to the docks, amenities for boaters, and ways to foster a welcoming community. As the day progressed, the protagonist also reflected on the previous confrontation with the woman. That moment, while frustrating, had given a clear perspective on her personality and behavior. It was easier to see how she approached problems, how she handled conflict, and how she interacted with others. These insights were valuable for forming a strategy. Understanding her mindset meant the protagonist could anticipate her reactions and plan accordingly. The incident had become more than an annoyance. It had been a small case study in human behavior and business dynamics. Later, the protagonist spent time visualizing the Marina's future under new management. Ideas flowed freely, hosting small boating events, improving amenities, creating a friendly and professional environment, and ensuring that both locals and visitors enjoyed their experience. Every detail seemed to matter: the layout of the slips, the clarity of rules, and the overall feeling of welcome. Each positive change was imagined in vivid detail, reinforcing the sense that this opportunity was worth pursuing. It was not just about the property itself, but about creating something meaningful and enjoyable for everyone involved. The evening brought a quiet reflection. The protagonist considered the ethical aspect of the situation. It was important to approach the idea not out of spite, but out of strategic opportunity and genuine improvement. Success in business and life often came from patience, observation, and thoughtful action. Acting impulsively or seeking revenge could lead to mistakes. The protagonist knew that this approach was more rewarding in the long term, both professionally and personally. It was a delicate balance of strategy and integrity. As night fell, the protagonist drafted an initial approach to the woman. There would be no hostility, no mention of the previous incident, just a professional inquiry about the property and a clear expression of interest. The key was subtlety. Gauge her willingness to sell, present a fair offer, and emphasize the vision for improvement. Patience was essential. Rushing would likely ruin any chance of a successful negotiation. The plan was to be calm, professional, and friendly, letting the woman see the opportunity without feeling threatened. The protagonist also reflected on personal growth. The incident had highlighted the power of calm observation and strategic thinking. Instead of reacting with frustration, the approach now was measured and thoughtful. Small moments of conflict often revealed opportunities that were invisible to those acting impulsively. The woman's need for control had opened a door for potential positive change, and the protagonist was ready to walk through it with patience and clarity. By the end of the night, the protagonist felt a quiet satisfaction. The situation that had started as a minor confrontation had evolved into a meaningful opportunity. The key was careful observation, strategic thinking, and a commitment to ethical action. The plan for approaching the woman, assessing the marina, and envisioning its future was clear and well-structured. Excitement mixed with calm purpose, creating a sense of readiness for the next steps. This was not just about acquiring property. It was about transforming an environment, improving a community space, and demonstrating the value of patience, insight, and smart decision-making. Before going to bed, the protagonist reviewed notes once more. Every detail mattered, from financial feasibility to human behavior, from logistics to community impact. The plan was now more than just an idea. It was a framework for action. Tomorrow would bring the first steps in executing this strategy, and the protagonist felt confident, prepared, and energized. The previous day's irritation had transformed into opportunity, frustration into insight, and the potential for conflict into the possibility of success. The protagonist finally rested, knowing that this was only the beginning. The confrontation on the dock had been the spark, but the careful thought, observation, and planning had created a foundation for something much bigger. Calmness, patience, and strategy were proving to be more powerful than anger or impulsive reaction. The story was unfolding, and the protagonist was ready to act with wisdom and foresight, confident that the right approach would lead to a positive outcome for both business and personal growth. The next morning, the protagonist returned to the marina with a quiet sense of determination. The plan had been carefully prepared over the past day, and it was now time to begin the first steps. Walking along the docks, the protagonist observed the routines and the energy of the place. People moved with a relaxed pace, enjoying the morning sun, while some staff attended to maintenance tasks. Everything seemed calm, almost serene, despite the tension that had existed here just a day before. The woman who had caused the earlier disruption was already on the dock, moving briskly between slips, talking to staff and overseeing operations. Her demeanor was confident, as if she owned not just the property but everyone's attention. The protagonist noted her actions quietly, remembering the earlier confrontation and how it had provided insight into her personality. There was no rush, no confrontation, just careful observation and preparation for the next steps. Over coffee at a small Marina cafe, the protagonist reviewed the plan. The approach would be subtle and professional. The idea was not to confront or challenge the woman, but to express interest in the property in a calm, respectful way. Timing, tone, and clarity were all essential. The previous days of reflection had made one thing clear. Patience and strategy would yield far better results than impulsive action or overt frustration. Later that morning, the protagonist found an opportunity to speak with the woman directly. A friendly greeting and a polite introduction set the tone. There was no mention of the prior incident, only a professional inquiry about the marina and its operations. The woman responded cautiously, her curiosity piqued by the calm and professional demeanor. She seemed interested enough to continue the conversation but remained wary. The protagonist listened carefully, observing her reactions, tone, and body language, gathering further insight into how to proceed. The conversation moved slowly, naturally, and without pressure. The protagonist emphasized respect for the property and admiration for the marina, subtly conveying interest without revealing full intent. The woman, flattered by the respectful attention, shared details about the challenges of managing the marina, from maintenance costs to staffing issues and the pressures of keeping regular visitors satisfied. Each piece of information was noted, forming a clearer picture of the potential opportunity. After the initial conversation, the protagonist spent the next few days continuing observation and casual discussions. There was no rush. Patience was critical. Every interaction provided more insight into the woman's priorities, her concerns, and how she perceived the value of the property. It became evident that she was proud of ownership, but also aware of its challenges. The protagonist now had enough information to begin thinking about negotiations, timing, and approach. With careful planning, the protagonist drafted a clear offer strategy. The offer needed to be fair, professional, and appealing, emphasizing benefits while respecting her position. It was not about creating pressure or asserting dominance. It was about showing that the proposal was a reasonable and mutually beneficial opportunity. By highlighting practical advantages, the approach would appeal to her sense of pragmatism, even if she had initially been focused more on control than on opportunity. The protagonist decided to present the offer in a formal yet friendly meeting. The setting was chosen carefully, a quiet part of the marina, away from staff and other visitors. The conversation began with appreciation for the marina and its history, followed by a clear expression of interest in acquiring the property. The tone was calm, respectful, and confident, creating an atmosphere that allowed the woman to consider the proposal without feeling threatened or defensive. At first, the woman reacted with surprise. She had not expected such a direct approach, especially after their previous encounter. However, the protagonist remained composed, listening to her concerns and responding calmly, never showing irritation or impatience. The offer was explained clearly: a fair financial proposal, assurances regarding the transition, and a vision for improvement that would preserve the marina's reputation while creating a positive experience for visitors. Each point was made with care, emphasizing collaboration rather than confrontation. The woman took time to consider the proposal. She asked questions about intentions, timelines, and management style, all of which the protagonist answered thoughtfully and honestly. The calm and professional approach seemed to have an effect. Her initial defensiveness began to soften, replaced with cautious curiosity. The protagonist noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. The crossed arms slowly unfolded, her voice lost some sharpness, and she began to engage more openly in conversation. Over the next few meetings, negotiations continued. The protagonist remained patient, listening carefully to each concern, adjusting the offer where reasonable, and maintaining a professional, respectful demeanor throughout. The process was deliberate, not rushed. Each interaction reinforced the principle that calm observation and strategic thinking were more effective than pressure or confrontation. Slowly, the woman began to see the potential benefits of the proposal. The idea of selling the property, once unlikely, started to become more reasonable in her mind. Finally, after days of thoughtful discussion and careful negotiation, the agreement was reached. The protagonist would purchase the marina for $2 million, a fair and well-structured deal that respected the woman's ownership and addressed her concerns. The moment was both ironic and satisfying. The person who had called the police to assert control was now agreeing to sell the very property that had been the source of tension. The protagonist remained calm and composed, understanding that the success lay in strategy and patience, not in proving a point. With the purchase finalized, the protagonist began to plan the transition. The first priority was maintaining smooth operations and ensuring that staff and visitors experienced no disruption. The emphasis was on creating a welcoming, well-managed environment. Every detail mattered. Scheduling, communication, and improvements were carefully planned to enhance the marina's appeal and functionality. The protagonist wanted to ensure that the space reflected thoughtful management, professionalism, and genuine care for visitors. The irony of the situation was not lost on the protagonist. Just days earlier, a minor confrontation had seemed like a frustrating interruption to a relaxing afternoon. Now it had led to a significant business opportunity and the chance to create a positive impact on a community space. The lessons were clear. Patience, careful observation, strategic thinking, and ethical action could transform even minor conflicts into meaningful outcomes. The protagonist felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that success had come from calm, thoughtful action rather than reaction or confrontation. As evening approached, the protagonist walked the docks again, this time with a sense of ownership and responsibility. Staff and visitors moved comfortably, unaware of the recent negotiations. The marina had not changed physically, but the energy felt different. The protagonist envisioned the improvements and changes that would soon be implemented, creating a thriving, enjoyable environment. The future looked promising, shaped by strategy, insight, and careful planning. Sitting on the deck of the boat once more, the protagonist reflected on the journey so far. The minor confrontation had sparked a series of observations, reflections, and strategic moves that had culminated in a significant achievement. There was no bitterness, no sense of revenge, only the satisfaction of turning a challenge into an opportunity. The calm approach, patience, and attention to detail had been the key to success. It was a reminder that even small moments could have far-reaching consequences if approached wisely. The night fell, stars appearing one by one above the marina, and the water shimmered softly in the moonlight. The protagonist felt a deep sense of accomplishment and readiness for the next phase. The purchase was complete, but the real work of improvement, management, and vision was just beginning. The experience had provided valuable lessons in human behavior, strategy, and the power of patience. It was clear that thoughtful action and calm decision-making were far more powerful than impulsive reactions or temporary victories. With a quiet smile, the protagonist made a mental note to continue observing, planning, and improving. The marina was now in capable hands, and the future promised growth, enjoyment, and community impact. The day had begun with tension and ended with a strategic victory, showing that calm, human-centric thinking and careful planning could transform even the most unexpected situations into meaningful opportunities. The protagonist stayed a little longer on the deck, enjoying the peace of the night, reflecting on the journey, and feeling confident about the days to come.